Hello, everyone. Welcome to our panel, the EU Joint Clinical Process, Opportunities and Challenges in Bringing Innovative Medicines to Patients in Europe. My name is Tommy Bramley. I'm the Senior Vice President at Global Pharma Consulting for AmerisourceBergen. We've assembled a distinguished group of panelists for this discussion. I'm very honored to be moderating this group. A few notes before we start. Your microphones are automatically muted to ensure optimum sound for everyone. We do invite you, though, to share your thoughts. You can do that in the Ask Question chat box that you can see on your screen. We are planning to have a 10-minute Q&A process after the discussion to address any of your questions. So you can do that at any time. We have a moderator that is looking at those questions, facilitating our ability to have that question and answer period at the end. To gather your feedback, we're also conducting some anonymous polls. And this discussion is being recorded, so we'll share a link after the panel. Finally, as you can see on your screen, we have some related content that we encourage you to download for additional insights. So let me introduce the topic. We are just 18 months away from the implementation of the JCA process, and we thought it was an ideal time to gather this audience and gather this panel for an open discussion to discuss the JCA process and the joint efforts. We want to share with you what we know, what challenges and opportunities it will bring, and the potential next steps so we can get you best prepared for that environment. As you're aware, the purpose of the JCA is really threefold: looking to eliminate inequality, reduce redundancies, and speed access and innovation to therapy. There was a recent pilot conducted with 11 pharmaceutical products and 24 health technology assessments, and it showed great promise, laudable results, but there's still significant complexities. So what I'd like to do is start to introduce our panel. We'll start with Mihai. Could you introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Tommy, for having me here today. So my name is Mihai Rotaro. I work for EFPIA, the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations, representing the R&D pharma industry in Europe, and I work there as a senior manager for market access.
And can we go to Casper next?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Casper Paardenkoper. I'm a partner at a strategy consultancy called Ventura. And at Ventura, our mission is to transform healthcare together, so with all stakeholders, and making healthcare more accessible and beneficial for all. And how I personally contribute to that is that I'm leading our Value, Excellence, and Policy Center of Excellence, from which we support life science companies in accelerating optimal patient access to innovative treatments. And thanks for having me as well.
Thanks, Casper. And we're having some technical difficulties here, so myself and Herbert Altman are sharing a camera, so I'm going to invite him into the frame.
Thanks, Tommy. It's a pleasure here, and it's always good to overcome challenges. So my name is Herbert Altman. I'm here the head of commercialization and access solutions at Pharmalex. Since February this year, I'm in this position, and before that, I was more than 15 years with Novartis company, responsible for region Europe, market access, pricing, and reimbursement. And in this role, also the Novartis representative in the HTAR work group of EFPIA, and also participating in 2 Joint Action 3 pilot projects. So happy to be with you in this panel. Back to you.
Yeah, back in the frame. And Jürgen, could you do an introduction?
My pleasure. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jürgen Huismans. I work at the pharmaceutical company MSD within the Global Market Access Organization, and together with my team, we focus on access and policy within the HTA frame.
Excellent. Well, thanks everyone for joining again, and thanks for the introductions from the panel. Just to share with you the agenda, what we'll be going through today. So we've accomplished the welcome, the introduction, and the panel discussion. We'll begin. But first, I wanted to share with you some of the organizations that are on the phone. So myself with AmerisourceBergen, Herbert with PharmaLex, and Casper with redundancy, we are part of the AmerisourceBergen family. We are on a journey that reflects our focus on a global united team that is solving market access challenges, helping patients on their journey to receive innovative therapies. And we are becoming Cencora. Our new name reflects of how we are coming together, united to creating healthier futures across the globe. So with that, I'd like to direct the first question to Mihai. We hear a lot about the joint CA process, and to get the conversation started, could you please share your thoughts on what companies need to do to be aligned, to be ready for this new environment? What needs to go right, and conversely, what could go wrong with those organizational structures as they prepare for the joint clinical assessment environment?
Thank you very much, Tommy. It's good to start off with the easy question from the very beginning. I think it's important to note that it is a game changer. It's a new step in evaluating and assessing medicines at European level. Obviously, we're talking here about region EU, but it does have the opportunity, and for sure, it will impact companies that are active in the European market, and the likely impact will be all across the life cycle of the medicine. Chances are that companies here on the line, but also companies out there in the market, will be impacted by the HTA regulation already from the clinical development from the clinical development team, all the way to regulatory, to HTA, and market access and affiliates at national level. I think in terms of what needs to be done to prepare, obviously already a good step is that people are interested in the topic. You're attending this webinar here. There's a lot of, probably there are more questions right now than there are answers, but a good place to start would be to check out the EUNetHTA 21 website to see all the activities and the materials that they have produced. We'll come to that probably during the course of the discussions. For those who don't know, EUNetHTA 21 is a consortium. It's acting as a service contract to the European Commission to already pre-discuss the processes and the methodologies and the templates that will be needed for the future system of joint clinical assessment. They won't be the final rules of the future system, but they already give you a good indication as to what's about to come and what's about to happen.
Thanks for that, Mihai. And I'd like to direct the second question to Jürgen. How do you see large pharma companies dealing with this? What are their biggest challenges at what is considered well-established organizations?
Thank you, Tommy. Well, let me just first start by saying that just like any small to mid-sized company, we are now trying to establish broad awareness and understanding within our company of what the EU HTA regulation, the JCA, and all the other components mean to us as an industry, as a company. There are still a number of gaps that we see within the JCA, methodologies, timelines, the level of interaction and engagement that we would like to have more clarity on. And as this affects all industry, we're working with Mihai and his colleagues at FPI to make sure that we fill these gaps on time before the regulation actually rolls out. You know, thinking about the differences as a larger company with a well-established organization, as you mentioned, I would say the challenge really lies in shifting responsibilities of work from the local level to global and regional levels within the matrix organization. I think at this point in time, HTA dossier submission is usually prepared and executed by local teams with, of course, close collaboration and support from different above-market departments, like when it comes to the evidence, modeling that's needed, and so forth, to be able to deliver that local dossier. And in preparing for JCA, these countries are, now advising global and regional functions how to create EU submissions. So it's a little bit the other way around. And within this matrix, we need to establish new ways of working to be able to deliver on this new HTA reality in the EU. And that will that includes different internal procedures and structures. And maybe just to finalize, the JCA is only one part of a reimbursement dossier. So we're also focusing a lot of our attention on how this impacts local HTA procedures. So there might be potential duplication, additional analyses, and there might be changes in timelines. So we're really looking to what are these changes at the local level, and this requires close and regular engagements with the local teams in both the larger as well as the smaller markets. All 27 member states will have some level of impact, so we have to make sure that we reduce as many duplication and any potential patient access delays as possible.
Great to get your perspective too, Herbert, given your recent role at Novartis, given your role in some of the pilot phase. How do you think about pharma and the challenges that they face and how they get organized?
Yeah, thanks, Tommy. And I agree very much with a lot with what Jürgen said. I think in the big pharma companies, this matrix organization and finding out what is the new way of working in a fast way, because the timelines are very pressing. You now connect market access activities with the regulatory process even closer with submission timelines and also the PICO scoping phase and all this kind of stuff. So I think there is also a lot of education necessary for the global teams, for global franchises in this matrix organization to understand very well what kind of evidence and structure and format is needed to support there. I think there will be a lot of openness because the simplification of doing only one JCA dossier in the beginning makes a lot of sense. Of course, there is the second piece to go from this pan-European dossier then into national discussions. And here, of course, there is also a lot of explanation needed and experience needed. So as I said, the new way of working is important with the clinical teams, with the regulatory teams. So cross-functional, I would not deprioritize anybody, but that's very important that this is becoming more fluid and transparent and already put into the strategic planning process as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Herbert, for adding to Jürgen's response. I'd like to invite Casper into the discussion and see how you see different challenges, compare and contrast small and mid-sized companies versus large pharma companies. How should they be thinking about the joint clinical assessment?
Yeah, thanks, Tommy. It's a good question because on the outset, I was also thinking initially, so what can be the difference of pharma companies? A pharma company bringing a treatment to the market. But if you look to the large pharma companies like Jürgen and Herbert described, it's what you see, it's well established, and not only well established, but also well staffed usually at both levels, at the regional level, at the local level in the countries. And you also see that usually the regional level was really involved more in setting out the pan-European strategy and more like a global value dossier. But the affiliates, as Jürgen said, they were really focusing on delivering the local HTA process. And the main thing, and I think that's quite in line with what Jürgen described for MSD, but what I see broader is indeed that, yeah, when JCA comes into place, it's really the regional team that needs to get a stronger role in the actual HTA submission. And the local teams really focusing on engaging with the relevant HTA bodies to get to shape the JCA and the research question in there, but also to make sure that the JCA report in the end got adopted at the local level, to avoid, for instance, what Jürgen mentioned, that we get like duplication efforts. So I think both are still in a large pharma company, but it will be really different roles and different capabilities also as well. Which, and looking at large pharma companies, Jürgen alluded to it, we need to change working procedures and processes and alignment models, which can be quite a task. So I think for the big pharma companies, it's mainly kind of an internal challenge. And then if I look at the small and mid-sized companies, what happens there is that in general, they have less well-established market access teams in the different European countries, especially in the smaller ones. So for them, the big challenge will be to find a way to engage with the different local HTA bodies to, in the end, shape the research question, the PICO that's in there, and especially in terms of what's the comparator needed and the outcomes in the local level. And also once ready to really work with the local HTA bodies to get the JCA report adopted. Because as said, it's a bit of a contradiction almost. There's like, it's a central procedure, but I think it's even more important also to locally work together with the HTA bodies to shape the question and get it implemented once a report is there. So I think getting feet on the ground is a big one for small and mid-sized companies. And an additional one is if you also look at the portfolios, you see that a lot of these small and mid-sized pharma companies have specifically ATMPs, so the advanced products, more cell and gene therapies or orphan drugs in their pipeline. And for that type of products, the current methodologies are not really clarified yet, or if you look the other way around, if you look at the standard methodology being proposed for EUNetHTA 21, there's a big challenge for them. So the small and mid-sized companies will also really need to look at working together with the coordination group to optimize methodologies over the coming 12 months that are left. So a bit different challenges for both companies, absolutely.
Really appreciate that perspective, Casper. As we invite Mihai to share his comments, we're also going to do a poll of the audience. So we'd like to, this is an engaging panel, so we want to engage with you. So do you know how often a manufacturer, a health technology developer can interact with the JCA assessors during the process? So this is for the audience to respond to. And as you're responding, Mihai, I'd love to get your thoughts in terms of that organizational structure between small and mid-sized pharma and how you think about getting prepared.
Thank you, Tommy. Again, yeah, I think it's a difficult question, and Jürgen and Herbert and Casper tried to articulate it. It's probably going to be a bigger challenge for small and medium-sized countries because there isn't necessarily that availability of resource and that manpower at that national level. Chances are that from the very beginning in 2025, the process will be driven more by member states than the other way around, in the sense that this is what we are hearing already in our discussions with EUNetHTA 21 and at national level. A lot of the HTA bodies want to ensure that what they get now as submission dossiers will still be preserved and the answers to their policy questions will still be available in the next way of working. So that makes things challenging because there's a risk that we will end up with simply a collection or an amalgamation of the existing 27 different requirements at European level. And at least on the FPS side, that's not what we want. There's no value added if that ends up happening. So there has to be an evolution and a recognition towards the fact that we need a European scope, really a European PICO, if you will, that can answer the questions to the policy questions of as many countries or as a bigger population as possible. And if there are still local, very specific circumstances, they can still be handled in a complementary submission. But having that unitary view is important to be able to achieve that. And I'll throw in one additional, let's say, advantage. There's also an advantage for member states themselves, because if you couple that European perspective, that European ask in the JCA space with the availability of joint scientific consultations, Europe as a whole can have a stronger voice in the design of global clinical development plans. So that's also very important, rather than having 27 relatively small requests or specialized requests. And if you put that in front of the clinical development team that has to decide on a plan that meets the needs of the whole globe, chances are slimmer that that's going to get foreseen in the clinical development plan. So there is that opportunity to use the JCA framework and the JC framework to build a stronger voice for Europe when it comes to how companies develop products, and then also for companies in terms of how they will get assessed. So maybe there's a good opportunity there for smaller and mid-sized companies as well.
Great point on that opportunity for smaller and mid-size. Herbert, I'd like to come back to you in terms of the experiences you've had so far during the pilot phases and what changes you see on the horizon. Where are we headed, and what have we learned from past experiences?
Yeah, thanks, Tommy. I think it was very good opportunity for us as a company to participate in the Joint Action 3 pilots. Actually, we had 2 compounds going through this process, and while in theory you understand already a little bit how to do it, and of course to write dossiers is not rocket science. That was done in the past very often. The dialogue with the EUNetHTA platform was super important to move together into this discussion and really have also time to align a little bit the perspective around these pilots, for example, and that will be in the future, of course, then in the JCA process. And we learned that things which we think are easy to understand while we write that into the dossier is not so easy to understand. And the selection of assessors and co-assessors was sometimes not so transparent to us. And then while we made suggestions, we then got different other countries and saw how they are reacting to our dossiers. Actually, one of our compounds was then used, a comparator was decided, which had not a regulatory approval, for example, for the indication. That was a big surprise, and while that was not expected, there was a lot of discussion also with the secretary of EUNetHTA and with some experts around there, how to handle this kind of topic. And I assume that will be the same for the JCA process when implemented in 2025. There is a lot of learnings for all participating healthcare system stakeholders, and we have to be very fast in amending the situation in a way that we really achieve the objectives that we want to have, to be faster, not redundant and bureaucratic, and of course make then also a more equal environment. So that's at least some of our conclusions.
Yeah. Thanks, Herbert. Really insightful. I'd like to invite Casper in again and get your thoughts on where we're at and where we're headed, and any additional context you can add to what Herbert shared.
Yeah, I don't have the in-depth experience of submitting some dossiers like Herbert did, because I haven't been working in pharmaceutical companies. I would like to focus a little bit more forward, also based on a bit of recent inputs we got through conversations we had. And I think one of the main things to look forward to is the fact that the coordination group that is now in place, that aims to have all methodologies finalized and ready by January 2024. So that's really good to be aware of, so that over the next 6 months, hopefully all methodologies are ready, which also means that there's there should be 12 months ahead of the actual go live for of JCA for oncology products. That I think is quite good news. I was sometimes wondering, will that be 6 months in advance? So 12 months is quite good. However, still really a lot needs to happen, and I'm really thinking of a few things that come to mind. There is something I also posted yesterday on LinkedIn is really that there really needs to be attention in the methodology and in the frameworks for ATMPs and orphans. Yesterday or the day before, there was a publication by the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine, and they really looked at the current authorized ATMPs in the European market and looked at the methodology as it stands now, and that would mean that 90%, so 90% of these treatments will be rejected in the current framework. So I hope that is not what we together want, so that there's still a refinement or an update or specific framework for ATMPs and orphans. I think one of the things also is, or two things I see around timelines. One is also the fact it's very short timelines, and in that timelines you need to assess and you need to respond to questions. And I think it's still finding a bit of a good balance that also companies have appropriate time to respond to questions from the assessors. It feels from conversations I've had that it's a bit skewed towards the assessors and the companies that need to respond in a few days. So hopefully that will be fine-tuned. And another one that triggers my mind is that the fact that it's not live yet, but of course the European Commission proposed the new EU pharma legislation, of which a key component is reduced timelines for the EMA approval. And if you then look at also the JCA, which runs in parallel with EMA approval, if EMA approval gets condensed, and then JCA also needs to get condensed, which I think is, to a certain extent, very good news if that will happen, because products will get to patients faster. However, it also should be workable timelines. So I think there the alignment between the new pharma legislation and the JCA timelines, I think, is a critical one to look at. And I think a last one for me, and that's what I always say, independent of JCA, I think in HTA in general, it's really important to involve both the patients, so patient advocacy groups, patient organizations, and medical societies. And I was a bit worried when I noticed that on the EU HTA stakeholder network that went live, they had their first meeting last week, that one of the most important societies, like being ESMO, like the European Society for Medical Oncology, they're not even part of the network. So I'm wondering how they will get consulted, because oncology products are the first ones coming up. So quite a bit of work to be done. I think it is manageable, but maybe one challenge still that I also see at is that what Mihai already mentioned, the EUNetHTA 21 group that all prepared a lot of the process and methodologies, they will stop working, or their platform will end by September this year. And this all needs to be handed over to the coordination group and its subgroups. So I really hope also that there's a smooth transition period in place, because September is like 3 months away, and a lot still needs to be done. So I do see a bit of challenges ahead, but I'm positive. But I did want to call out these challenges I see.
Great to hear you're keeping a positive attitude, and we do know that there's some challenges. I'd like to come back to Herbert to pick up on some of the comments that Casper shared.
Yeah, Casper was triggering my mind also when I spoke about the Joint Action 3 pilots. And I realized when we had the opportunity to do 2 pilots that we really learned from the first one and could transfer some of the insights and how to deal with this new setup to the second product team and then the discussions as well. And I was wondering, how would smaller companies, or which have only maybe 1 product in their pipeline, or not every year 1, 2, 3 products, which then they can leverage this insight. So I think we as an industry also have to make sure that the learnings and the insights are shared and somehow transparent. So Mihai from FPIA and also UCOP and other organizations and the HTA network may have to help in this situation to make sure that there is a opportunity for all the pharmaceutical companies to learn about this process and to leverage in the most efficient way, because it can be very laborsome as well from the organizational point of view to involve so many people in an early stage. That was maybe some other thoughts I was thinking about.
Thanks, Herbert, and thanks for that additional detail. Thinking in what that can mean on a local and national level, what does this mean for local affiliates or the local HTA bodies? Jürgen, could you share your thoughts on how this will impact or change the assessment at the local level?
Yes, definitely, Tommy. And as Casper mentioned, there's still a lot that has to be done at the European central level. So with EUNetHTA 21, their contract ending in September and everything having to be done at January 24, there's not a lot of time for the local HTA bodies to be prepared. To date, we haven't seen a single HTA body in Europe publish new procedures or new regulations where the HTA regulation has officially been implemented or has been absorbed. So this is worrying, as the regulation is designed to increase efficiency, avoid duplication of clinical assessment at the local level. And this is really something that will have to happen in like a pressure cooker for these local affiliates to be ready to have clarity of what's going to be expected of them when a JCA report is published, and what they need to add additionally in their local submission. So we are really intensifying our engagements as a company, but I'm sure many companies are doing that. Their engagements with the local markets to hear from them, what they currently expect, but also making sure that we can further enable them to engage their local HTA authorities to facilitate local procedures that reflect JCA reports, that have transparency about additional analyses, and also how that will follow through to other steps within a local HTA procedure, for instance, cost effectiveness, budget impact. These are all questions that are still outstanding. And I think that there is going to be a huge variability between different size countries where there will be HTA bodies that have, a lot of capacity, a lot of resources. They will definitely be preparing, and those that are, less prepared, that have less resources. So they will probably look to other markets and other countries and other HTA authorities to learn. So it's really critical that we initiate this, as soon as possible if we want this to be ready by 2025. And especially if you want to avoid in the initial phases of JCA, where the first product will go through this procedure, that we avoid any replication or duplication of efforts, and even worse, longer procedures, or that this will have a negative effect on patient access. That is, of course, not what the JCA was not intended to do, and what every local affiliate, of course, would like to avoid. So that's, I think, pretty much where we're at the local level. So there's still a lot of work ongoing, Tommy.
Yeah, I imagine so. It's a new environment, and a short 18 months to get prepared. Casper, I again would love to get your thoughts on the local HTA environment and how you think about the preparation.
Yeah, thanks, Tommy. And I'm just, there's a risk of repeating what Jurgen says. It's also a bit in my mind, but I would still call it out in the sense, because I think it's really important. And it's almost a contradiction. It said we're looking at a centralized procedure while we think, you take things away from local, but I think it's the alignment between the local affiliates of pharma companies and local HTA bodies remains, or is even more important and more intense than it's probably been in the past, I think, in some time. And there are three levels where I'm looking at. The first level for me is really that, independent of the submissions that will come through, I think it's also what Jurgen said, it's important over the coming months for local affiliates of pharma companies to engage with local HTA bodies and sit together to discuss, like, how will this look like from a local perspective? How can we work together to make sure that we align on the research question? How can we make sure that once the JCA report is there, how we will follow that through? And I think it's really discussing a new local operating model. And also there, again, I'm a very positive person, but like Jurgen said, I'm not seeing much yet of what's being presented from the HTA bodies. And I think this is a great opportunity, independent again of specific submissions, for HTA bodies and pharma companies to work together. And then secondly, then it really comes indeed for the actual submission. And I think that's where it's really important, to the extent allowed, of course, within the procedures, but to really work together with the local HTA bodies from the local affiliates to shape the research question. And also to make sure somehow also from within pharma, I think local companies also need to align between them to make sure that, yes, you do address the local needs, to avoid the duplication, as Jurgen says, but you also want to avoid, to a certain extent, to Mihai's point, that we end up with 20 research questions that need to be done. So I think it's also in the benefit of both the local affiliates and the local HTA bodies to align as much as possible on that, to make sure patients have fast access. And then that's the third element for me would be the part that after the JCA report is there, I think for every individual JCA report that's out there, to really make sure that the local affiliate and local HTA bodies work together to get it adopted as soon as possible, avoid additional clinical assessment questions, etc. So yeah, to I think reiterate what Jurgen said, it's, if these alignments are not working well over the coming months, also in the preparation, there's a huge risk of delay instead of accelerated access for patients in Europe. And yeah, I think great opportunity for companies to engage with the HTA bodies on a very important discussion for patients.
Yeah. Thanks, Casper. And it is that goal of accelerating.
If I could just add one aspect that neither Casper or I mentioned is, I think it's critical to leverage your trade association at the local level. I know that Mihai and his colleagues are working very closely to develop different trade associations, but that's where you can have a unified voice and also a strong voice, depending on, of course, the activity of your trade association. So I would also like to underline that aspect.
Yeah, well said, and important with the trade organizations. And I would like to come back to Mihai. You attended the first meeting of the Health Technology Assessment Stakeholder Network last week in Brussels. Given your participation, can you share insights with the audience from the meeting?
Thank you, Tommy. Maybe before a quick point before I do that to some of the things that were mentioned beforehand. Out of all of this uncertainty, if you will, and all of the process steps, and I'm reading very carefully all the questions from the Q&A, and they're very good questions. I think one of our key, probably maybe the key policy ask for FPIA is to have a role for the manufacturer in the future process, especially during the scoping process, but also throughout the assessment. That's not foreseen right now. That was already a practice during Joint Action 3, and I think Herbert can tell us that all the companies appreciated that. But there is a strong need, considering the short timelines and all the uncertainties, to be able to have the HTD to have a discussion with the assessors, the co-assessors, the rest of the coordination group, to really see what are the requirements coming from the PICO survey, to really discuss what is the data availability, to discuss what is feasible at European level, what can be done in a complementary assessment, and so on and so forth. So I would say this is really one of the key policy asks that we're advocating for at FPIA with the Commission and the coordination group. So to the stakeholder network, Tommy, it was, I would say that as far as I know, it's probably one of the very few instances where stakeholders have a role so specifically outlined in a regulation, in an EU regulation. And I think that was clearly obvious during the meeting last week. There was a lot of energy in the meeting. There were a lot of patient associations. I would say, I think if I remember the statistics correctly, the patient organizations are the most representative in that network. There were a few scientific societies as well, although unfortunately ESMO was not there, and a few industry associations and others as well. There was clearly a lot of energy, a lot of interest, especially from patients, to be more involved in the process, also both in the definition of the rules of the process, but also in assessments themselves. Where, to a certain extent, a bottleneck is the fact that, and it's probably something that it's visible right now, is in terms of capacity and resources on the coordination group side and even at the Commission side. There were clear requests to have more meetings with the coordination group, with the stakeholder network, more specific topical meetings to discuss methodologies, to discuss ATMPs, for example, orphans, to discuss the involvement of stakeholders and so on and so forth. But I think right now there is a lot of uncertainty when it comes to resources on the coordination group side and on the Commission side. And I'll finish maybe with this to say that when it comes to the coordination group work, there has to be a buy-in from the member states, that they have to allocate those resources to the work at European level while they continue to do their regular work at national level. If you remember from the regulation, it only applies to oncology medicines and ATMPs at first. So in 2025-26, there will be a European process, but for everything else, there'll still be the national process that we have today. So it does require an effort and a strategy and a vision to be able to benefit from that JCA in the national context. But there's also a need for more resources, I believe, at the Commission level, because there will be a number of assessments. They will need to be shepherded through. There is a need for somebody to be a project manager to ensure that there's a good alignment between EMA and the coordination group. There's a need also for more manpower, if you will, and there's a need for more manpower to staff the stakeholder network and to make sure that it is properly operationalized, that it can contribute as a meaningful vehicle to provide input to the coordination group. Thank you, Tommy.
Thanks, Mihai. Great to hear the energy, great to hear the robust discussion. It sounds like the challenges that we've highlighted are being discussed, being addressed. So that's fantastic news. So we want to come to the poll result. Do you know how often a manufacturer, health technology developer can interact? So we have a wide variety of answers. So I'm going to invite Herbert back into the screen again. We are sharing the screen. So we're doing very well with the sharing, and I'll turn it over to him to share what can be done with interaction with the JCA assessors.
Yeah, thanks, Tommy. And somehow the picture is not surprising. That it's not clear yet, and there are many answers possible, but one is it's not decided yet. The EUNetHTA 21 group has done one practical guideline to manage or to describe the interaction between health technology developers and HTA bodies. It's the D7.11. It's available on the internet, which shows also the way how they suggest to the commissioning group to manage this process. This was published in February 23 only. So it's still pretty fresh, I would say, and we need to find out what it is. But in the document, you can find already strong suggestions. And one of them is that the health technology developers or the pharmaceutical company should not interact at all with the assessor and with the co-assessor to ensure that they stay independent. That was a little bit different in the beginning when we had our Joint Action 3 pilots, and we found it very valuable that we have some chance to explain what we think with our clinical trial and how the evidence is described and the PICOs are managed. And there are three formalized interactions. One is during the submission phase and the scoping phase, of course, but then there is also one factual check at the end. But this is all managed via the HTA secretary, which has to be established then, and there is no direct interaction. Of course, if the assessors and the co-assessors have questions, clarifying questions, they can send them via the secretary to the manufacturer, and then they could and should respond most of the time with a deadline to make sure that the process is not enlarged too much. But the other way around, if the health technology developer is having a question or want to explain something that's not possible in this way. Otherwise, I mean, they have to go via the secretary and again ask this question. Very important to realize that also at the end, before the JCA report is then published, the manufacturer can look through it and can do a factual check. But the factual check cannot introduce new evidence, cannot rediscuss the assessment. It's only really to make sure that there is correct data there in this dossier and there is not something really wrong. So still a lot of unknowns and something we definitely have to learn as all healthcare system stakeholders about how to manage that in the future and if this is really the best way. At the moment, I think there is not enough space for manufacturers to interact with the health authorities here. Back to you, Tommy.
Yeah, thanks for that and good insight in terms of that interaction. We're going to launch our second poll here and give the audience a chance to respond. And as we're doing that, I'm going to ask a question that are coming now. These are questions and answer from the audience. So the first question, will companies have the opportunity to discuss the PICO with HTA bodies for the GCA before the coordination group? Herbert, do you want to take that one?
I can do a first one, but Mihai, maybe I invite also you who have been much closer to many discussions here. The manufacturer will submit a letter of intent that they want to do a joint clinical assessment and then also describe the intention, the indication, and the potential label and everything. And then the assessor and co-assessor will discuss with the countries via this process, which has to be defined, what are the PICO schemes that they will decide on. There is then a PICO presentation meeting where the manufacturer can participate and learn more about this decision. To my understanding, it's not really a discussion on what PICO makes sense or if 5 or 2 or 1. That's still, of course, very open. So it's more, I would say, a download of the health authorities to the manufacturer. This is how we want you to write the dossier and show the the evidence. But Mihai, please comment.
Thank you, Herbert. So as I mentioned, this is the key policy ask for EPIA, to really have a meaningful scoping meeting to really discuss the scope and the results of the survey. This is a little bit of a quagmire because it reflects a dichotomy, a fight, if you will, a challenge between the text of the regulation, because the text specifically says the scoping process must take into account input from the manufacturer. But there seems to be at this stage an unwillingness from HTA bodies, especially the experience from EUNetHTA 21, to really take that up to mean a meaningful discussion on the PICO survey. Now, as a plan B, if you will, as a less optimal alternative, there is a possibility, and there's nothing preventing manufacturers from being well aligned and well coordinated at national level and trying to influence and discuss the PICO via the national level. So affiliates can and may be very well interested to have a role in the national discussions and to ensure that the unified company view is well channeled through the national level, and that it may find itself in the results of the PICO survey. And I think one of the questions was specifically on what advice we would have in terms of preparation. And that is probably a very good advice to give, to ensure that the companies are aligned. And even already in 2024, if you know and if you expect, and let me put it in, for the assets that you expect will fall under scope already in 2025, it's important that you start this work in 2024 already, to be able to ensure that you have the alignment with the affiliates and everybody knows, on the one hand, what's expected in the national countries, but they also know what the regional office and the company wishes to, let's say, communicate and to put forward in the countries as their best view on the best possible, on the best PICO for that particular assessment.
Yeah,
Thanks, Mihai. Yeah, Casper.
Yeah, so I just want to quickly add to that, because I think it's what I said a bit before, but I think it's really in the benefit of not only the companies, but also the HTA bodies locally, that they engage together. Because I think also, like, companies want indeed to get the smooth process, but I think also for HTA bodies, you don't want to be like the blocking part. And I think HTA bodies are there also to make sure the patients get their treatment as soon as possible. And therefore, again, that alignment, I think, is really, really essential, because I think probably every additional PICO that needs to be assessed on a central level will kind of exponentially increase the amount of time needed for that. So everybody is probably after the same aim, and to have the amount of PICOs limited. And I'm not sure if we get to one. I heard estimations, the most positive ones between 3 to 5, but you only get there when you align on a national level. And that's why I think it's a really important ask. And as Mihai said, I think you can still do that anyhow. So that would also be my advice: go out and discuss.
Thanks. Yeah, jump in, Jürgen.
Sorry to jump in here, Tommy. No, that I think, knowing that alignment is critical is something different than actually acting upon it. And having worked in the local market for quite some time, I know that HTA bodies don't always realize that it helps their work, and it's their work to connect to a manufacturer. And I think at the local level, keep looking for that engagement. And in many cases, HTA bodies don't know everything about a new therapeutic area or specific tumor types. So what do they do? They reach out to the scientific organizations. So make sure, I would recommend to local affiliates, make sure you continue scientific exchange, connect to the scientific bodies, patient advocacy groups, because they will also be the stakeholders that an HTA body will consult with. So I would just continue that external engagement at the local level, and that will, I think, will still be the best process to inform the best PICO scoping and shaping.
Jürgen, I'm going to stay with you, and this is a question from the audience. I'll direct to you first, Jürgen, and then ask others their thoughts. Do you think the regulation will achieve its intention of reducing duplication of the HTA process? So with the joint clinical assessment, will that indeed reduce redundancies?
Yeah, well, you're asking for a crystal ball answer, and of course, I think everybody's aspiring to that redundancy of at least the clinical assessment. So, I think it will really be determined by the amount of engagement an HTA body has within the JCA. Do they see their own PCOS reflected? There will be a consolidation. So definitely, if HTA body doesn't recognize the PICO within the JCA report, they might ask for additional analyses, and that's their prerogative. But I think every member state signed off on the European HTA regulations, so they have to give due consideration to the JCA report. So I would expect at least the ambition is there, but obviously there's going to be a lot of there's going to be a learning curve there. And that's why it's so critical to upfront, before you have a product that goes through the JCA, that you have that discussion with your HTA body, that you look at the examples that are going to start happening post January 2025, so that you can leverage any learning that's going to happen. But certainly, we can't exclude every duplication or redundancy, but I think the ambition of both companies as well as the HTA body should be to avoid them as much as possible. And again, it will also depend on the local HTA system and how much they actually incorporate clinical effectiveness in the HTA system. Some of them just look at cost effectiveness.
Good point, Jürgen. I'm going to ask Herbert to share some of his thoughts and expand on your perspective.
Well, thanks. I agree very much, Jürgen. It's not easy to say yet, and of course, it's a learning system. So I would also expect that after some time, that really these learnings are applied and redundancies are further and further eliminated. What I expect very much from the beginning, that the smaller countries and mid-sized countries in the EU will benefit from this process, because hopefully this JCA report will already cover a majority of their questions about the technology assessment. And of course, they will add something to make sure that the product is well placed in their local healthcare system. But it should reduce that very quickly. While the early launch countries, we may see a little bit more redundancy in the beginning. But that's, of course, something to measure, to watch, to monitor, and to make very active recommendations. The EUNetHTA 21 group has also suggested that after every JCA assessment, an evaluation of feedback is collected from the manufacturer. And I think that's a good opportunity to really make recommendation and share that also with FPIA or EUCOP organization, to make sure that there is a common thinking around that.
Thanks, Herbert. Any additional comments from Casper or Mihai on the topic?
Maybe for me, Tommy, if you'll allow me, I think it's hard to promise that the objectives and the ambition will be realized already in 2025. But I think there is an opportunity to have significant efficiencies gained in the long term. I think if I am to look at a crystal ball, as Jürgen suggested, I think working at FPIA is easier for me to look in crystal balls. I can see a future where you'll have a certain specializations between HTA bodies, a future where, for example, Nordic countries will be specialized in doing ATMP assessments, whether Benelux countries will be specialized in doing orphans, or so on and so forth. And I think the name of the game, and I'm seeing the questions also in the Q&A, is the fact that the JCA is done by one or two countries, one or two assessors on behalf of everybody else. When you reach a point that you know that the system is solid and it produces good JCA reports that you can use in your country, you can simply rely on the work done by somebody else, if you will. So there is a significant opportunity for HTA bodies to create these efficiencies in their national procedures and in their use of local experts and in their use of staff and resources and so on and so forth. And I think if and when, I would say more when we reach that point, there is an opportunity for manufacturers as well, because that means by de facto that the JCA assessment done at European level will be the assessment used in countries as well. If the member states won't question it, or they won't try to redo it, or they won't try to change it or to twist it or any other way. So I think all of these can and should be achieved in the medium to long term.
Thanks, Mihai.
I think
we do.
Mihai, to that point, it's interesting that the crystal ball. Recently, I think it's last week in the conversation, somebody said rightfully that we also need to look at this in a little bit longer term. Probably also how the EMA came to existence, which was in the beginning, everybody was also worried, like, oh, now we have central regulatory authority, but in the end, that also all settled out. So I want to be positive on that side. Like the EMA is there, it's a given, and probably JCA will be a given in a few years as well. Give it some time.
Well, thanks, Casper. We have about 4 minutes left. There's about 40 questions, so we won't get to all of them, but we do promise to follow up. But one of the themes, and we'll use this as the closeout question and go around each of the panel members, so about 1 minute. Your thoughts on the PICO scoping, the final assessment, and what impact that will have on the joint clinical assessment, how manufacturers should think about it. That's a very common question, is the PICO. So I'll start with you, Casper, and then we'll go around the room.
Yeah, for me, and if looking at the PICO scoping, I think it's the essential part for multiple reasons. And I think, let me call out the two most important ones that I see. One, that one way or another, we should really try, in the benefit of patients, to limit the number of PICOs that end up in the final GCA. So if we can really stay with 3 or 5, I would really be happy. And the other one is really about the C and the O, so the comparator and the outcomes that we're going for. And there I see a big challenge. The comparator and the outcomes can differ per country, of course, so how do we harmonize that? But also the fact that what I discussed earlier, if you look at orphans, ATMPs, there is not always a comparator. There are not always endpoints that we can measure. We don't want to wait like a full lifetime for some gene therapies to take effect. So that are, again, yeah, the two main things that I'm closely watching to make sure that we optimize that part.
Yeah, 2 minutes to go. Maybe my comments here. It will be it will need an extra effort from this HTA group, then from the assessor and co-assessor, to bring this together as a minimal number. Maybe 2, 3. Of course, one European PICO would be the best solution, which is then afterwards also accepted by all the countries in leveraging that on a national level. So that's my comment. I don't know, Mihai, what do you think?
I think I agree as well. It is the crucial step in the assessment, and I think what we're seeing today shows to a certain extent the need why we have the HTA regulation to begin with. Herbert mentioned that one of his experience with JCA 3 assessments included an off-label comparator in his scoping. And that's to be very, very provocative and honest. It's what we sometimes see, or we sometimes suspect, a little bit of a tail wagging the dog situation, where certain comparators at national level are used just as a means to strengthen the hand of the pricing and reimbursement authority in negotiations. And part of the reason why we advocated for an HTA regulation is to try to really dissociate and disentangle the clinical effectiveness from the assessment and the appraisal at national level. Because as we say it, we've said it in public statements, if you take a statin, a cholesterol-lowering drug as a Romanian or as a Finn, the effect on your body is the same. Now, the effect of that avoided heart attack in the Romanian or the Finnish system, that's a completely different discussion. But what we're talking about in the joint clinical assessment at European level is that clinical effect on the body. And that is really the same across the board, across European patients.
Thanks, Mihai. And Jürgen, final thought?
Yeah, so simply said, I think the PICO should reflect the broader European clinical practice. I mean, that of course, there is going to be different comparators if you want really everything. There's going to be a huge amount of indirect comparisons, but only will add to the uncertainty in the JCA. So I would really hope that European organizations, medical sites also collaborate to make sure there's consensus around the clinical practice, because that should drive PICO shaping. And like Mihai mentioned, I don't think you can entirely take out policy from HTA. There will always be policy objectives, but the clinical assessment should be really as clean as possible.
Thanks, Jürgen, and thanks to the panel and thanks to the audience. A really robust discussion. Lots of promise, certainly some complexities. We'll be thinking through those, and we didn't get through all of the questions. You can reach out to myself, you can reach out to the panel members with Contact Us, and we'll be following up. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your patience with our technical difficulties, and we're learning how to share cameras, and I think we did that very, very well. So thanks, Casper, thanks, Mihai, thanks, Jürgen, and thanks, Herbert. And again, thanks to the audience for spending an hour with us. Thank you, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.